I'm Linda Fox. I'm a senior reporter at PhocusWire and your host for today's New Reality With. I'm with Philipp Mintchin, he's CEO of Splyt. Warm welcome to everyone who's listening in. Thanks for joining us. The series is one-to-one interviews with industry leaders is possible via partnership with Salesforce. Working with Salesforce, you can reopen travel with support from salesforceswork.com. Welcome, Philipp. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Linda. Thanks a lot for having me.
Okay, so let's kick off here. So cast your mind back to when really the COVID-19 crisis really began to gain momentum. You were, I believe, finishing off, kind of dotting the I's, crossing the T's for your latest round of funding. So you were in Japan. What was that like? What were your first thoughts that went through your mind?
Well, to be honest, for us, COVID hit a little bit earlier. And January 23rd is a day that I remember this year, January 23rd, 2020, because we have an office in Singapore. And at that moment, myself and our co-founder and CTO, as well as obviously our team members in Singapore, everybody was there. And, we were since June 2019, exceeding all of our forecasts and growing. And January was just an amazing month for us, as in the first 3 weeks were incredible. And then obviously January 23rd hits, numbers start dropping, and we realize that back then it was not yet a global pandemic for us. Back then it was, something is happening. And, a lot of the talks were in comparison to SARS and MERS. And so that was kind of, for us, the first time it hit Splyt and when we started taking certain actions. But you're right, as in, I was in Japan when it became of a global scale, when it became the global pandemic. That was somewhere end of March, if I remember correctly. And we were back then visiting SoftBank, who led our Series B round just recently that we've announced. And it was strange because Japan was different to a lot of other countries out there, as in they realized that COVID is there. Numbers were rising, yet everything within Japan was still open. As in our office in Singapore and our office in London, they were completely shut. Everybody was working from home. Countries were going into lockdown. As in CNN was playing nothing else other than COVID-related news. And we were sitting in bars, in offices, in restaurants, kind of still, let's call it, enjoying life at that moment. It obviously hit Japan, just like it did every other country out there. But I think the measures were taken a little bit later over there. So probably good for us. It allowed us a lot more face time with our new shareholder. But it was a very interesting experience, especially returning back to London with an empty British Airways flight with maybe 20 passengers on board.
And I understand from our previous conversations that there was actually a bit of additional stress there for you because actually your family was in Singapore because there was a plan to relocate. So again, just take us through what was happening there.
Yeah, so we've tried relocating to Singapore twice by now. First time we moved in December 2019 and left Singapore end of January, as in my family left Singapore end of January just because COVID hit Singapore as in Asia. And, we said it's much safer to be in the UK. We've had a look at how SARS played out back in the day, and Europe was a much safer place to be in. So from my point of view, together with my wife, we decided, it's best for her and our two kids to go back to London. When it comes to, fast forward to beginning of March, I think mid-March, Europe and the western part of the world was doing a lot worse than Singapore and Asia were doing. So we've decided, it's time to move again. So they flew to Singapore, I flew to Japan and said, I'll see you in 2 to 3 days. That 2 to 3 days turned out to be more than 2 weeks. And Singapore shut its borders. I was not able to come back, even though I have an employment pass, which gives me the right to reside and to work in Singapore. And, we were playing with different thoughts back then. We were thinking of, let's give it another 4 weeks. I'll live in Japan. It's not the worst place to be in. But things were getting worse every day. And we've decided back then that because, we're UK residents, we can come back to the UK. We did that, and today we are super, super happy we took the decision back then. But it was quite stressful. I've been away for the family for weeks at Entes, and it was nothing new to me. But that
sure,
moment,
but you had the virus hitting, you had your family somewhere else, and you had also quite an important funding round to seal. So, I mean, I guess kind of a tricky situation.
Definitely.
Given that you were kind of sewing up that funding round, were you thinking at that time, worst case scenarios for your company, for your sector, because you were, as I say, trying to get that investment done?
Definitely. I think every organization has three scenarios at least, right? It's your worst case, you're realistic, and then you're a little bit optimistic case, which you try to hit by, just exceeding your own expectations. But in reality, I think every worst case scenario that any organization, including ourselves, had out there was nothing in comparison to what actually happened, right? I think nobody ever imagined that something could wipe out travel globally in every single country on this planet by 95, 100%, right? If PhocusWire published many articles, and there's a lot of information out there on large brands that nobody thought would ever have, a downfall by 95%. Today have it, right? Isn't the number of bookings, you can count them on your hand, and therefore the worst case scenario that we prepared pre-COVID was not ready for a COVID-like scenario.
So were the things at that period of time that you were learning as, at the beginning of the crisis, that you had to put into play very quickly?
I think for startups in general, it was a little bit different. Startups usually always raise. So from that point of view, that's beneficial. Because you think of extending your runway while burning cash to grow. So we were very fortunate that we've just started our process a lot earlier than COVID started. So what we had to do is go kind of back to our very early days, which is pure burn, work on strategy, work on long-term growth, rather than the growth phase that we were in. So I would say it was a little bit of an unpleasant moment for us to see that incredible growth that we were on to all of a sudden disappear in a matter of weeks. But I think as a smaller team, as in we're close to 50 people, we held through this closely together. This crisis actually brought us closer together. It opened up a lot more communication channels between the individual team members, between us as an organization. And we became a lot more transparent with what is happening, what are we trying to do, what are we trying to achieve, what are our short-term goals to get us out of this and to get us through this. And therefore, there's definitely a huge learning curve for us. And kind
of on that,
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to sort of add that was on that. Startups are often known to be quicker to cut deep, cut quickly, cut deep. When need comes, compared to more traditional companies. Was that something that you had to factor in at the time?
It is something that we had to consider. It is definitely something that we had to consider. We had to think at that moment when we knew that COVID is a reality and it's not going away in the next 2 to 3 months. We needed to look at every possible outcome. And we were fortunate enough not to have to go down this route. We didn't let anyone go. We stuck through this as a team. We took salary cuts. Some of us, such as the leadership team, took more. The rest took less. And we're very fortunate that we have such a strong team that worked through this together. And everybody sits in the same boat at the end of the day and wants to get through this crisis together.
So just looking at, as I say, shoots of recovery, glimmers of hope, what would you say the situation is now? One for your company perspective and one from perhaps, what your partners are saying.
So we work very closely with our partners. So we have partners all across the globe. We work with the likes of Alipay, Trip.com, Booking Holdings, Grab, and so we get a lot of different insights from a lot of different regions, which is really interesting to see. They obviously change a lot, right? Philippines, for example, went into lockdown yesterday. So Southeast Asia or Asia in general, that we all had hopes for an earlier recovery, now isn't looking as promising as it did a week or 2 weeks ago. But it's interesting to see and work closely with our partners to understand what is happening out there. For us as an organization, it gave us a lot more time to accelerate new verticals. So for example, micromobility was something that we always wanted to launch, and now we've accelerated that vertical, and we will launch it earlier than expected. So that's just like we do with ride-hailing, where we aggregate different ride-hailing / mobility suppliers around the world. We're now doing the same with micromobility. And so from that point of view, I think we are focusing on our core product and extension to that product through different verticals, and how we can in the future assist our partners in kind of unlocking that world for their customer. That's what we are focusing on. When it comes to our partners, we're seeing that obviously because all of our partners are of significant size, a lot of them had to make cuts, and a lot of them had to start focusing on core areas and their core product, which in some cases is ride-hailing, in some cases is payments. But we're lucky that all of them have a very long-term thinking approach, and we're working on them. And
so I was just going to ask you more widely in ground transportation, is that, what are you hearing there? Because you hear some reports about more investment going in there, and then other reports about some players actually having to close down. So what are you sort of hearing there?
I'd say that ground transportation is going to be more popular than ever. I think ride-hailing, scooters are definitely going to see an acceleration when it comes to adoption rate. Just because I think we see a huge decline in use of public transportation. I think even when I was in Tokyo back in the day, as an end of March, already back then the reports were coming out that there were more cars on the street than usual and less people inside trains and buses.
And do you think that same kind of investor appetite that there was for ground transportation and mass, more widely, mobility as a service is still going to be there, that sort of appetite?
I'd say in the longer term for sure. There might have been a couple of investors or a couple of deals that have been paused in the first half of this year. The second half seems to be a little bit more active, to be honest.
Sure.
Was we hear?
Yeah. I think it was Grab, maybe, that got some funding, we heard.
Not that I heard of.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of deals happening, and it seems that a lot of them were just paused, but they were still in the pipeline and are now going to happen. Obviously, nobody knows what's happening tomorrow, so this might change as well. But overall, I think long-term mobility as a service, is going to play a key role here. And I think a lot of these players are actually also accelerating those partnerships. Because now they have kind of a little bit more freedom when it comes to resourcing to accelerate those partnerships and do those different verticals for mobility as a service.
So because you were actually originally going to be a B2C ground ride-hailing service yourselves, and then you pivoted, and I know you've said in the past that you were very grateful for the support you got from your investors, but any regrets there at all?
No regret, not looking back. But to be honest, it worked out really, really well for us.
Okay, good. So let's move on to the bigger picture here now of going forward. Autonomous vehicles is, I suppose, getting mixed reports. Some investment going in, some partnerships still with big car manufacturers. still being announced. But what's your overall view of where autonomous vehicles are going? And do you think it'll be purely from a sort of commuting standpoint where it'll be, really take off, or do you think there's a role for it in sort of more leisure tourism as well?
Again, I think that answer is very regional. I don't think that there's one size that fits it all. When it comes to autonomous, I'm obviously a big believer in autonomous. I think you see Waymo doing excellent work in that field, Didi as well. There was a big article in The Economist a couple of days ago in regards to Didi rolling out autonomous vehicles across various cities. So from that point of view, I think it will become a norm one day, right? The question is what routes, what cities, because some cities are a lot more complex than others to handle, right? Some cities are, or some parts of cities are building infrastructure that's specially catered to autonomous vehicles. So there it will, of course, work extremely well. In regards to whether it will work for the leisure travel sector, I hope so. As in, I think that it brings a lot of value to the actual end user. It brings more affordable rides, better utilization of the vehicle, because you can actually just run it constantly. So from that point of view, I think we'll see it. I think it will come a little bit later for the tourism space than it will come for the domestic market and for domestic use cases. But I think we'll start seeing it a lot more, and in some areas a lot sooner.
Would you foresee a time where that'll also be integrated into your platform?
I would very much hope so. As in, I think it makes a lot of sense from our point of view. The right supply for the right partner is what we're happy to facilitate.
So just looking at the fact some of your biggest backers are Asia-based, you've got Grab and SoftBank, and they both kind of make no secret about their super app strategies. I think it was SoftBank CEO recently talking about it specifically, about the widespread use of smartphones, about how integral apps are becoming in lives generally, shopping, living, travel. So do you see any change to that because of the pandemic?
I'd say in certain regions, I'd see an acceleration of it. And I'd see an acceleration of it because I think we'll see more collaboration. So we'll see more partnerships across different brands and from different verticals. So I think pre-COVID, the bigger the organization was, the more they wanted to do everything themselves. I'm talking about the Western part of the world now. I think because a lot of them now actually had to make cuts, and because a lot of them have now to focus on their core business, a super app now means core business plus partnerships. Right? I think Uber is a great example of how they're rolling out public transportation in partnership with different transit agencies, right? So I think we'll see an acceleration in the Western part of the world into what we describe as a super app. Again, there's, everybody has their own definition of super app. For us, sure. It's multiple services from multiple parties within one ecosystem from one brand, right? Just like, from Grab, just like, from Alipay or WeChat or Kakao. I think here, super apps are already defined somebody who has two services. So I think that will change. I think we'll see a lot more collaboration among brands and among different verticals, and super apps will also become more widely used.
And do you see, room for them now in Western markets, whereas people often dismiss them for Western markets because we already had big players and we had platforms, and that seemed to be the strategy going forward. Some might question whether we would need super apps and whether they would gain the same traction that they had in Asia. Do you now see, because of the situation, that might happen?
I definitely think so. I think that obviously super apps solved a certain problem in Asia, right? So as soon as you solve a certain problem, your solution becomes widely adopted and widely popular, right? So yeah. That's why we saw a very quick and widespread adoption of super apps across Asia, right? There's a little bit of a different problem that I think apps are trying to solve in the Western part of the world, right? I think super apps is definitely something that will happen, and all it means is multiple services within one ecosystem, within one brand that you trust, right? And I think Apple is trying to do that with the clips that they have announced recently. I think they're trying to take their phone back into that super app mode to say, we can, the iPhone will be the super app. But I think other organizations, other brands are also looking into that.
So we've got a question here from the audience. I'll throw it in here now. What's the toughest question you're being asked from your customers right now as they try to restart operations?
I think projections. I think a forecast, right? As in, when will travel return to pre-COVID levels, right? Or not only that, but what will that path look like, right? And I think that unfortunately, no one can actually give a proper forecast here. And while we try to collect data, we have our own data. Obviously, we see as soon as lockdowns get lifted, we see that. But the reality is that it's moving and changing on a daily basis.
Fair enough. Now, does the role and even actually the scope of Splyt widen going forward? You've talked about wanting to integrate scooters, and you've obviously been able to accelerate that. But do you now look at, are there other potential verticals that you might think, well, we've mastered this one, we can now look at this?
I'd say we're mastering. We haven't mastered, right? As in, we're constantly improving, and we're constantly doing the best to manage complexity for our partners, and to unlock the world for the users. So from that point of view, we will always continue doing that as long as kind of Splyt exists. But yes, the simple answer is yes. We've seen that, partners of ours and companies in general look at Splyt as a middleware that manages complexity extremely well. That is, we manage today, I think 40 live integrations that we have, and all of them extremely large players. So I think partners really, really respect the work that we have done. And we're now all of a sudden getting proposals and offers to manage complexity in a whole different sphere, as in beyond ride-hailing and micromobility and food, which we're planning to roll out, let's call it the beginning of 2021. But all of a sudden, companies are coming to us and saying, we don't actually want to do it ourselves anymore. We want somebody who can do it on behalf of us. And you've done it so well with the other verticals that we'd like to discuss this with you.
Okay. So now, connected travel has been talked about in the travel industry for quite some time. Do you believe that this now becomes more of a reality, and there'll be, a big push to try and drive some of these developments further than they've ever kind of gone before? Yes.
The simple answer being yes. As in, I think the industry will definitely see a lot of collaboration and on that front.
And again, is there perhaps a role there for Splyt in terms of working with partners within travel and hospitality that perhaps it didn't before to make that happen for them?
So one of the things that we try to do at Splyt is, first of all, we've built the world's largest mobility network. We are constantly expanding that as we expand our services, as in our verticals. What else we're trying to do is we're trying to convert our closest and largest partners into our shareholders. We've done so with Grab, we've done so with SoftBank, we've done so with American Express successfully, right? And we will want to continue that. The reason why we want to do that is because it creates a certain bond, obviously, right, between a shareholder and an investee, rather than just a commercial partner. And
Sure.
That brings a lot more opportunities. And this is what we're trying to achieve with our largest partners. And we try to collaborate a lot closer. There could be something that comes our way, which is really not something that we thought we would ever work on. But again, we have a full roadmap, so we would really need to prioritize correctly, and we would make sure to look at every opportunity separately.
Of course. So just another quick question here from the audience. If, as you say, Apple is a super app, should it try to do something like its iTravel service that was rumored to be doing before? Would that be a good strategy for Apple, do you think?
I think Apple in general is doing really well, as in their last earnings report showed that. But in regards to travel, yeah, why not? As an Apple has a huge ecosystem they could leverage on. I think one of the things that they would need to do is try to do it a little bit different than Google, because there's this huge anti-Google wave, right, that's happening, where everybody is extremely worried about Google taking over the travel space, the travel industry. So I know if Apple can or wants to learn from what Google did in the past and do it a little bit differently, that's one way to do it. But whether they'll do it or not, we'll see, right? I think they're launching a lot of different things, whether that's clips or unlocking scooters with your iPhone camera. They're definitely trying out a lot of things before they implement it globally.
Watch this space, right?
Yeah, watch this space for sure.
So, is there anything to say that the pandemic will slow down innovation? And that could be, in innovation generally, or it could be innovation in Asia, which is, we look to the East.
I don't think so. I think in some cases, obviously, it's never yes, right? It's always yes or no, right? It depends on the industry. I think we'll see in some instances we might see a little bit less innovation for the travel industry, but at the same time we might actually see more innovation in the travel industry, because we're trying to cope with the new normal, right? We're trying to cater to.
No, so I was just going to say, would you call one element of the travel industry over another element of the travel industry?
Look, I think we're going to see a huge change in the travel industry, right? And unfortunately, we'll see a lot of restaurants and hotels and airlines go bankrupt. We already have that. Sure. And so from that point of view, that's an industry that will need to be built up again. It was the first to get hit, and that means it's going to be the last that will get out of this. So innovation will obviously happen because everybody is trying to save the travel industry and to get the volumes back up. I think in Europe we saw a lot of travel, even though still 7 out of 10 trips were done domestically right now, rather than cross-border. So the simple answer is yes and no. It really does depend on the industry. But I think digital first is something that it has accelerated by 3 to 5 years. Even your own conference is going to be a hybrid, right? Yep.
The Arizona conference. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say to save the industry, because you'll remember that there was a lot of talk prior to the pandemic about saving the industry, well, saving the planet and the industry's role in that. So what happens from your point of view to sustainability now, or are companies purely fixed on their own sustainability, as in their own survival?
Are companies fixed on their own sustainability? Definitely, right? As in everybody needs to make sure that they survive right now, as in keep the lights on, be able to survive. That's on everybody's mind. But there's a really great opinion piece that was written in the New York Post, which said, I think it said, the headline was, I saw a future without cars, and I loved it. I don't know if you've read it, but in London, for me, it's the same. I saw a city without cars. I was able to walk anywhere. There was less pollution. There was less noise. It was a very, very pleasant experience. Now, unfortunately, not a short-term reality, right? And it definitely not as simple as just locking down a whole city. But I think sustainability is on the top of minds of all the small to medium-sized to big brands. And even more so now that everybody has seen how it can look like than actually before.
So there are always calls for collaboration across the industry. Would you say that there are signs of greater, deeper collaboration going forward because we need, as an industry, to get going again?
I would really hope so. I think collaboration is key in order to get this industry back on track. I think summer is great, as in people are keen to travel, but we're all expecting a second wave, which means again less travel, less consumption within the travel space. So from that point of view, I think collaboration is key, and it might create collaboration between competitors that would have never happened in the past, just because they all have enough data to leverage on, and to at least provide on that specific day sensible forecasts, depending obviously on the global situation.
So looking back over this whole period of time, what would you say you've learned about running a business during a pandemic?
I'd say running a business is not easy. I think that everybody knows that who's ever done a startup, right? But for us, I think it's people first. I think that's what I've learned the most. And I think we were so focused on growth, we were so focused on expansion, we were so focused on raising, that kind of everybody was just going their own way. And this pandemic allowed me personally to take a step back and to cherish the team that we have, and to say that we can leverage on the people that are this organization, that are Splyt. So from that point of view, for me personally, it's about communication and transparency for with the team. And that's what I personally learned the most. But it's one heck of a difficult time, and I think everybody agrees with that.
And what would you say are your kind of greatest challenges right now?
I'd say our greatest challenges right now is to build still our long-term business, as in supporting the user when they travel. Right. On the one hand, right, we're continuing with our existing partnerships. We have a huge amount of partnerships in the pipeline that we have signed or are signing, which are all focused on cross-border travel. Right. Everybody in this industry still very much believes that travel will return. Question obviously how and when and by how much. But for us, it is doing that, but at the same time also capturing some of the domestic travel opportunities that are coming our way. So, whereas before we would have, put them to the side, we're now obviously looking at how to integrate some of those partnerships on a domestic level to capture domestic travel right now.
So another quick question from the audience here. SoftBank, one of your backers, obviously. Do you think it will continue on its kind of incredible investment strategy that we saw in the past couple of years?
I think that's a question that should be directed at SoftBank. Their stock price is doing well, and so from that point of view, we'll see.
Fair enough. And a year from now, what would you say in terms of what's going to be different when it comes to the travel industry?
You know what? I think that's purely my opinion at this point, right? Because I am a big believer and optimist, and maybe of a dreamer when it comes that we can end this pandemic, right? That I believe in science, and I believe that we will find a cure against COVID-19. That is me personally. So what I would like to see in a year's time is a recovery. Right, and I would like to see a recovery not just for the sake of Splyt, but all for the millions and millions of people that are employed by this industry, right? That are depending on cross-border and on domestic travel. But I think when it comes to what we will see across the industry, I think we'll see some consolidation and a lot more partnerships formed, and a shift on domestic travel for the short to medium term.
Okay, Philip, great having you in our virtual hot seat. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So it just remains for me at this stage to say that's another wrap for a New Reality With series. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsor, our partner, Salesforce, for working with us on these one-to-one interviews. And as the industry looks into the second half of 2020, embark on a new safe era of travel with Salesforce CRM. Many more details about that in the story that accompanies the interview on PhocusWire. Thanks again, Philip, for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day.